9:16 on the morning show with Jeff and Will on this fine Monday morning. And joining us, as she does every Monday around this time, it is the editor-in-chief over at the Rockland County Business Journal. It is Tina Traster. Good morning, Tina. How are you this morning?
Oh, good morning. I was just saying I'm feeling in need of a weekend.
Well, we did just have one, but I assume your weekend was quite a busy one?
Well, kind of like a working weekend, I guess. Yeah, even more so than usual. Where to even begin? Let's see. This past week was very busy. To begin, during the week, was it Wednesday or Thursday? We covered the very somber Yom HaShoah 2025 commemoration. This is held every year in collaboration with the Holocaust Museum and the judiciary. And, it just truly is a very somber event, no matter what year. This year in particular, the event was themed Standing Up Against Injustice. And it really spoke to all the speakers, all the featured speakers, really underscored what could be the fragility of a judicial system, and how that sort of fragility can result in what happened in 1930s Germany under Hitler with Nazism. And though it may seem a stretch to go from that to where we are in this country today, I think it's not such a stretch because we are seeing the judicial system pushed to the brink and challenged and tested in what really feels like, for many, unprecedented ways, particularly around the deportation of people who maybe, American citizens or green card holders, or what have you. So it was, the way the event goes is that the Ninth Judicial District, all of the judges attend, and they are wearing their robes, and there is a candle lighting ceremony for Holocaust survivors and victims. And it's a time for this event, which attracts, more than 300 people. It certainly is a time for reflection. Both, what I wrote was not just backwards, but in this case, forwards. This is always about never forget. And I think that there have been times in our country's life where that was a sentiment that, felt more esoteric. And somehow today, I think, according to what many people said, it feels real and imminent and really important. There's a justice. Her name is the Honorable Anne Minahan. And she's been there at this event before and has spoken. She's extremely eloquent. And she said, quote, "In teaching ourselves to be stewards of democracy, we need to look forward and to look within. And in doing so, acknowledge that the Holocaust was not inevitable." She said, quote, "It occurred because too few people, groups, and nations stood by nations stood up, and too many people, groups, and nations stood by." And so it like I said, it felt like it had not just kind of historical reference, but I think that the people who were the speakers from this event were really talking about where we potentially are today. So, very, very kind of gripping room to be in, it was this week. And then moving on, unless you have any thoughts.
No, it's all great reporting, though. We do appreciate it.
Thank you. On Friday morning, different sort of gathering in the county. this time the what do you call it? The third annual housing forum. Now we have a crisis in this county. We know that's been acknowledged. Public officials say so. Somebody from the state came down. Her name is the Commissioner CEO of New York State Homes and Community Renewal, Ruth Ann. I'm gonna hope I don't butcher this. Visnorska. Anyway, she was talking about the governor's commitment to build 100,000 affordable homes and the importance of affordability and how that plays into the ecosystem and jobs and employers needing people to be in the workforce to be able to afford to live in a community. We've talked about that many times, and she gave an interesting opening address, and she said that I think she said 4,000 maybe units have been built, but only 14 in Rockland County, and she acknowledged that very low number, and then pointed to some of the developments that we have been writing about and talking about that are on the planning boards for mostly in the village of Haverstraw. And she cited, of course, West Hab, which would bring in 81 units, and then, of course, the chair factory, also that would be over 300 units. So that would really allow Rockland County to catch up. We know that Howard Phillips is trying to obstruct these developments with holding pilots hostage. But it seems to me that these developers are so determined to build this kind of housing, and the county is so desperately in need of this kind of housing that they will find, I'm confident that they will find the workarounds that they need and the kind of grant money that they need so that these projects can move forward. We'll put a pin in that. The forum, was a sort of an all-day event. I saw a lot of officials there, a lot of familiar faces. And so, it certainly is, this was the third annual, and, it seems like the attention to this has not waned. There's an absolute acknowledgement that this is something that needs doing. Oh, and of course the county too, recently handed out those Halo Awards to the Chair Factory, to West Hab, and a couple of other developers, about $13 million. So that was another big event. That was Friday. And of course, last night we were at the Lawler Town Hall meeting.
Ooh, how'd that go?
Which, of course,
you're our first on-the-ground report from how that went. At least first person we've spoken to that was there.
Oh, okay, good. I'm glad I can be of help. Well, am I allowed to say SH blank T show on the radio?
I believe that is, as far as I know, still by the FCC is a no-no. I just want to play it safe, but I think we get the picture of where you're of what you're meaning by that.
Okay, what I would say is this. And we'll have a report out later today. But essentially, it seemed to be 700 seats seemed filled. There had been a lot of chatter leading up to this that somehow this room was going to be, stocked and all favorable and softball questions. And I can tell you that is the exact opposite of what went on. There were about a dozen constituents who, through a raffle, were able to stand up and express their concerns and worries. And I would say that, but even before Lawler took the stage, okay, even when Teresa Kenny and the other moderator were trying to lay out the kind of the basic rules of decorum, it was too late. The room was so charged, and people are so angry, and they're also so scared. And you know what? When people are that fearful, and understandably so because of what's at stake, and really just they feel the chaos and they feel the uncertainty, for their retirement and for their investment portfolios, and you get 700 people in a room, and they want to be soothed. Okay, they want to walk out of there feeling a little bit less anxious. And I would say that even though the atmosphere that was created probably would have made it difficult for any speaker to try to allay concerns or to try to, parse through all of the fear and confusion, I think that Lawler, in response to questions which in some cases he didn't address the question at all, but in the ones that he attempted to address, his answers were they basically, had the sound either of a politician defending himself or a politician using a lot of familiar talking points that people hear, from the Republican side nightly on the news or wherever they, listen. And I think that as the evening went on, it went on for about an hour and 40 minutes. The tension continued to rise. It was viscerally loud and yes, and by the end, there were slurs and ugly things that were being screamed and heckled and booed.
You said there were slurs?
What?
You said there were slurs, like racial or like mental?
No, like you're a liar. Is that a slur?
Oh, like, well, I'd more say insults or if people were throwing around curse words.
Yeah,
slurs,
like
you usually get into real bad words, like real bad.
Yeah, I think where he didn't do himself a favor, and I guess this is just I think that people wanted to be comforted, and I think that people wanted answers, and I think that people wanted. I think he conceded on certain things in saying that it's wrong to deport Garcia to El Salvador. In the more extreme issues, the more extreme examples that were raised, he would concede and say, I agree with that. But I think that there's a feeling, and I don't know, if everybody, who was pressing him was necessarily a Democrat or a liberal. I think that if there's a reason to worry about Medicaid, I think that's a pretty universal fear. In this country. So it was, I would not call last night's forum productive. It was very unruly. It was very unpleasant. And I don't think that anybody who walked in there feeling fearful and upset walked out with any kind of comfort. And I think that's really the unfortunate part of it. But that's my take. I don't know if you've heard otherwise.
We had a report about it from other outlets that had already published media on it and how it went. Pretty much describing it the similar ways, I think. A little less detailed, but overall, yeah, saying it was a pretty, I suppose, hostile environment may be the case. Do you have any? I guess faith, for lack of a better term, or optimism that if this is what you're looking for, of course, that the congressman will take the feedback given, or the request given, or the statements given, and act on that in any kind of way, or was there just not really a sign of that? I know you said he conceded on some of the things that were said in the room, some of the statements made or questions asked, but it doesn't sound like a lot of people were. Like you said, satisfied with what they had heard there?
I guess it depends on what kind of a moral stance he's willing to take on certain issues. I guess it depends on, which political direction he's hoping to go in. If he feels vulnerable for his congressional seat and makes a run for governor, although I think, that would probably be tough in New York. Is what I think he's probably trying to make a political calculation about, what he needs to do to get where it is he wants to get to. And I think that's the way politicians behave, is they game out, how they're, especially if he's so young and clearly ambitious. So I'm sure that he's factoring in, who he needs to, curry favor with in order to satisfy his own political ambitions. At the same time, one is asking oneself, is there a moral core? Is there an understanding that things that are going on are just absolutely, there are things that are going on that are just so blatantly wrong. And he seemed to acknowledge those things in some instances. Does he have enough of support within his own, conference to be able to sway? Does he actually have any real power? I would say the answer to your question is there are too many questions to answer in order to be able to figure out, how he's going to move forward. But the truth is he does represent this district, and he was in a room with people who are angry and terrified. And, I think maybe it comes down to more like style. I think that, think about it this way. Let's say, you're a parent and you have a really frightened child. There are different ways to handle that. Bottom line to me is in terms of my assessment anyway of what went on in the room, is people wanted to feel soothed. They want to feel that he, who has access, Lawler has access in Washington and represents this district, he has unique access. They want to feel that there's somebody there who's speaking for everybody, for all the constituents. And I just did not get the impression that anybody walked away feeling lighter last night. And again, I think that's down to just more of a little bit of the reality, because to me, Lawler's just a freshman congressman, and how much power does he possess individually? But at the same time, I just don't think people heard from him what they want. They just were not. They did not feel any calmer. The night just escalated. It got worse and worse and worse. I mean, I, for one, could not wait to get out of that room. It was really, really, and it felt like at any moment, it could become very explosive. So, we're seeing this all around the country. We see it on these town halls on TV. But what was interesting is when I've watched these on the news. But with more than 700 people in the room, it felt really significantly filled with conflict, just because of the sheer numbers. I mean, some of the supporters were down in the front where I was sitting. There was a small group, but for the most part, this was a room that was filled with constituents who are really upset, really angry, and really disgusted in terms of the threat to, as we were talking about the Yom HaShoah a moment ago, really upset over the potential threat to the strength of our judiciary, because they are seeing it pushed beyond anything they've ever seen before. I don't know. As a politician, maybe you need to get away from your talking point. This is just opinion, but maybe you need to veer from your talking points. Veer from that defensive posture, and be able to, even if you're not feeling it, to show some empathy in order to take the temperature down. And I would say that maybe what Lawler was saying was accurate. Maybe some of what people think is exaggerated. But I think, the failure on his part was to find a tone and a way to speak to people that would have made them feel listened to and heard, and to turn the temperature down rather than to turn it up. And maybe he just doesn't have that style. Maybe he's too young. Maybe he's too green. Maybe, he's never been involved in a situation like this before where there's so much division and dissent. There was one thing he said that was just crazy ironic. He said something that, he made some statement. I'm just looking through my notes here. I have to find it. But to indicate that, we all agree with everything, with each other. And I mean, obviously, nothing could be farther from the truth at a time when we are so clearly divided. So I think if you're going to face a crowd like that and you want it to go well, I think the thing to do is you've got to be more compassionate. You've got to be more empathetic. You've got to make people feel that they're talking to a friend and not a foe. And so, I mean, I'm not his campaign manager, but if I were, I think I would be talking to him about, psychological tactics today rather than policy, because I think that's where the failure was. I mean, true, this was a crowd that came in really whipped up. Although the protest outside prior to that was absolutely peaceful. But nevertheless, I mean, these last 100 days, people feel like they're being whipsawed, and they're worried about their portfolios, and they're worried about their retirement funds, and they're worried about Medicaid, and they're worried about Social Security. And these are existential issues for people. This is how you get up and live every single day. And I just felt that, whether these are real threats or perceived threats, that's hard to parse through for all of us. But I think that what Lawler what he didn't do was to be able to read the level of fear in the room and address it in a way that was productive, rather than more kind of defensive. And I think in that sense, the night was, bottom line, I think it was unproductive. So that's my assessment. There will be other takes on this. Like everything else, it'll be, he was the best person in the world, he was the worst person in the world, and it'll be simplified. But my analysis is, that this is about the nuance of dealing with a group of people, and they could be independents, they could be libertarian, they could be Democrats, they could be Republican. I mean, in the end of the day, when your basic livelihood or your sustenance is threatened, I think you might quickly forget who which party you pledge to, and worry more about how you're going to make it from month to month. And there are plenty of people, I think, in the room. I was listening to some of the chatter around me before it got started. I mean, people are sickly worried. They just don't know what to expect. The tariffs, the economy. There's so much horrific uncertainty, and so much division. And I just think that I think he's a bit tone deaf. And who was he really talking to? Is he speaking when he's in a town hall like that? Is he speaking to Mike Johnson, or is he speaking to his constituents in Rockland County? I don't know. I think that it's going to be a very tough 4 years, because I imagine that unless any of this kind of confusion and chaos calms down, people are waking up every single morning with a great amount of angst, and so they should be, because there's uncertainty on the stock market. There's uncertainty on Main Street, and then there are like real life stories of people who are being impacted in terms of the tariffs, in terms of their small businesses. So this is not.
Speaking of small businesses that are being impacted, we're gotta go. I'm sorry, Tina. We're way over time. That's all right. I understand. You get on a roll, and sometimes you got a lot on your mind. That's okay. But we have some small businesses that we gotta help sell their stuff too.
Not a problem. Not a problem. I hope that was a little bit helpful.
Oh, it definitely was. Thank you. And for more information, just go to rcbizjournal.com, sign up for e-newsletters, and all sorts of great stories. Thank you, Tina. As always, we'll talk to you again on Monday.
All right. Have a great week.